Okay, so you know how you sent us all that stuff from the BNIC network about Detroit real estate?
Mm.
Well, we're going to really get into it today, see what they're all about, especially, if you're thinking about passive income, maybe you want to see some, some pretty good returns.
Right.
So we'll be looking at, why Detroit is such a hot market, according to them at least.
Yeah.
And what the BNIC network, what kind of services they actually offer folks like us, both, for people new to this and for more experienced investors.
Okay.
And also, how they deal with risk.
Yeah, risk is a big one.
It is huge, especially somewhere you don't know.
Exactly.
And then we'll get into how you can actually get involved, even with just a little bit of money through that fractional ownership thing.
Cool.
So let's dive in.
Sounds good.
So from what I'm seeing here, they're really pushing Detroit hard.
Yeah, they're all in on Detroit.
They call it the #1 market for single-family rental properties in the entire U.S. And they're talking about, these unmatched cap rates of 10 to 15%.
Which is huge if you think about it.
Yeah, and for folks listening who maybe aren't super familiar with all the lingo, cap rate basically means how much return you can expect on a property each year based on the income it brings in.
Yeah, so a 10% cap rate would mean you're making 10% of your investment back every single year just from the rent.
Yeah, exactly. And they seem to be laser focused on these single family homes, nothing too fancy, just good, solid rentals.
Makes sense, bread and butter stuff.
Right. And they're really trying to appeal to different types of investors.
Oh, yeah, they break it down.
They talk about this retail investor, and for them, the big thing is turnkey investments.
Oh, yeah, turnkey is the name of the game.
So what does turnkey actually mean in this context?
So basically, it's like you're buying a property and it's ready to go.
Oh, wow.
Everything's done.
Mm-hmm.
They found the property, they fixed it up. They even found a tenant.
Oh, wow. So
you just sit back and collect the rent checks.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty hands-off.
And they're saying you can get at least a 7 to 10% cap rate on these turnkey deals.
Right, which is really solid, especially for something so passive.
And to give you an idea of what that actually looks like in terms of dollars and cents.
Yeah, because percentages are great, but
right.
Show me the money. Right.
Right. They give some examples. So they're talking about investments, somewhere between $75,000 and $107,000 that are bringing in about $7,500 a year in net operating income.
Oh, wow. That's not bad.
Yeah. And just so everyone's clear, net operating income, that's basically the property's total income for the year minus all the operating expenses. So things like, repairs and property management fees. But before you take out stuff like your mortgage payments or taxes.
Right. So it's a pretty good measure of how much cash the property is actually generating.
And this specific example they use also mentions that the income is coming from Section 8 rents.
Which is interesting.
Yeah.
Because Section 8, that can provide a pretty stable stream of income.
Yeah, because the government's guaranteeing a portion of that rent, right?
Exactly. So it can be a little bit less risky than relying on just, regular market rate tenants.
Makes sense. Now, this is where things get really, really interesting.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
Especially if you're thinking about, starting out, maybe you don't have a ton of cash to throw around.
Right.
They've got this fractional ownership thing.
Oh, yeah, that's a hot trend these days.
And you can get in for as little as $500.
Seriously?
Yeah, and they're claiming you can still get around an 8% cap rate on that $500 investment.
Wow, so you're telling me I could become a real estate mogul for the price of a
I know.
fancy cup of coffee?
Right.
That's wild.
And they're saying it's completely passive. You don't have to do anything.
You just watch the money roll in.
Well,
fingers crossed.
Right. But they mention quarterly payouts, and you even get a share of any increase in the property's value over time.
Oh, so you get appreciation too.
Yeah.
That's pretty sweet.
So, that really opens the door for a lot of people who maybe thought real estate was completely out of reach.
Right. It definitely lowers the barrier to entry.
Now they don't just cater to, the small-time investor.
Right.
They also have stuff for the more traditional investor.
Yeah, the people who are maybe a little more hands-on or looking for a bigger upside.
Right, exactly.
Even though BNIC is still handling all the day-to-day management.
Right, so for this type of investor, they talk about managing the entire process of buying distressed properties, fixing them up, and then either selling them for a profit, flipping them.
Flipping houses, yeah.
Or renting them out for that ongoing income.
Okay, so you have some choices there.
Right, and their target return for this kind of strategy is at least a 10% cash-on-cash ROI.
Oh, yeah. ROI, return on investment.
Yeah.
That's the big one.
And they give this example of a $50,000 total project cost, resulting in a $7,500 annual NOI,
Okay.
which, if you hold it as a rental, that's a 15% cap rate.
Wow, that's a great return.
Yeah. And the other option they present is selling it as a turnkey property, once it's all fixed up,
Right.
for like $75,000 to $83,000.
Oh, wow.
So either way you slice it, you're looking at a pretty significant return on that initial $50,000.
Yeah, you're making some serious money.
And that brings us to their flip strategy.
The exciting part.
Right, which they're saying can really accelerate your returns.
So how does it work?
Well, they use the same example, that $50,000 investment turning into a performing Section 8 rental,
Okay.
making that $7,500 annual NOI. So that's 15% ROI, and they say they can do it all in about 3 months.
3 months, that's fast.
Yeah, so it's not just about, getting that rental income. It's also about how they use that income-generating property to get you an even bigger and faster return.
Okay, but I'm listening.
So they say a property making $7,500 in NOI could be valued at around $83,333
Okay.
if you're using a 9% cap rate as your benchmark.
Right.
And then they propose selling 90% ownership of the LLC.
The LLC, right? The limited liability company that holds the property.
Yeah. And they want to sell that 90% for $75,000.
Interesting. So you're keeping a piece of the pie.
Yeah.
You're not selling the whole thing.
And for you, the investor who put in that initial $50,000,
Yeah.
the numbers look pretty good. You'd get $25,000 in profit from that sale,
Okay.
which is a 50% cash ROI on your initial investment.
Wow. That's incredible.
But it gets even better.
It does.
You still keep 10% ownership in the LLC.
Oh, okay.
So you keep getting 10% of that net operating income every quarter.
So you have some passive income coming in.
Exactly. And this is kind of surprising, but you also keep full control of the LLC.
Oh, really?
So you sold 90%, but you're still in charge.
That's interesting.
So I think it's really important to understand how that works. What kind of control you actually have after selling most of the ownership.
Yeah, you definitely want to make sure you're comfortable with that arrangement.
Right. And they also talk about this preferred ROI structure, which seems like it's meant to give you even more incentive to invest.
So how does that work?
Well, the idea is you, the investor, get 100% of the first 10% ROI on the project.
Okay.
Any profit above that 10% gets split 50-50 between you and the BNIC network.
Okay, I see.
So in their example, with the $25,000 profit, the first $5,000, which is that initial 10% on your $50,000, goes straight to you.
Okay.
And then the remaining $20,000 gets split, so you get another $10,000 and they get $10,000.
Got it.
Which brings your total profit to $15,000.
So you're making a 30% cash-on-cash ROI in like 6 months.
Yeah, potentially.
That's a really tempting number.
It is, but we always got to talk about risk.
Absolutely. Risk is huge.
Especially with real estate and especially in a specific market like Detroit.
Right, because every market is different.
And BNIC knows this. They actually emphasize their focus on risk management.
Yeah, they should.
Yeah, they talk about their proprietary real estate deal management system.
Oh, wow. So they have their own system.
Yeah, they call it the REMS.
Their REMS. Okay.
Yeah, and it's really reassuring that they're taking risk management seriously.
Yeah, you don't want to just jump in blindly.
Right, and they say they have a really deep understanding of the Detroit market.
Which is important.
Yeah, and not just from the local perspective, but also from the out-of-state investor's point of view.
Right, because those can be two very different perspectives.
Exactly, and they've got this whole team on the ground in Detroit.
Oh, wow, so they're not just some remote company.
No, they've got rehabbers, property management companies, home inspectors, real estate agents, title and escrow companies, the whole shebang.
So they have all their bases covered.
Yeah, and that's really important. Having that local network can make or break real estate investment, especially in a market you're not familiar with.
Right. It's all about who you know.
And they even say straight up that Detroit is not your typical city.
What do they mean by that?
Well, they're basically saying that it's easy for out-of-state investors to get taken advantage of if they don't have the right people on their side.
Oh, so they're kind of positioning themselves as the experts who can guide you through the Detroit market.
Yeah, and, they might be right, because Detroit has its own unique challenges and opportunities.
Right, and if you don't understand those nuances, you could easily make some costly mistakes.
So let's talk about, someone listening to this who's like, okay, I'm interested, but I live in, California.
Right.
What services does BNIC actually offer to make this whole thing happen?
Well, they basically say they handle everything for out-of-state investors.
Oh, wow.
So they'll help you find those turnkey properties we talked about.
Right.
And they'll also manage the properties for you, which is huge because you don't want to be flying back and forth to Detroit every time something needs fixing.
Yeah, that's a nightmare.
And they handle everything, collecting rent, screening tenants, dealing with repairs, giving you regular financial reports.
Because you really don't have to lift a finger.
Pretty much. It's as passive as it gets.
And beyond the buying and managing of properties, they also have some other services.
Oh, yeah. They have a whole suite of stuff.
Like they offer financial education through free investment clubs.
That's a great idea, especially for beginners.
Yeah, and they do detailed investment analysis on specific properties.
Okay.
And they also do market research to find, the areas with the best potential for growth and strong rental demand.
So they're really trying to give you all the information you need to make an informed decision?
Exactly. And they really specialize in finding properties that are perfect for high-yield rentals, aiming for that 10% cap rate or higher.
They're all about those cash-flowing properties.
And their expertise in the actual property acquisition process, finding properties, evaluating them, and closing deals quickly and efficiently.
Yeah, that can be a big advantage in a competitive market.
So for anyone listening who's like, all right, I'm sold, how do I get in touch with these guys?
Well, they gave us all their contact info.
They did.
Which is smart.
Yeah, so if you want to learn more, you can reach out to Michael Evans. He's the president of BNIC.
Okay.
His phone number is 661-524-6674.